Namaste to all the viewers that have joined us today on another episode of Indic Talks, organized by Center for Indic Studies to discuss the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. To discuss the same, we have our speaker today, Dr. Swamini Swatman Vidyanand Saraswati ji, who has taught at several universities nationally, including UC Berkeley. She is widely recognized as a scholar of Advaita Vedanta and is a disciple of Pujya Sri Swami Dayanand Ji Saraswati, an internationally known Acharya of Advaita Vedanta tradition, interfaith leader, and scholastic author of Vedanta, responsible for the inception of the All India Movement for Seva, a non-profit enabling rural Indian children to receive a proper education. She is widely in demand for lectures and seminars in the US of A and internationally for her expertise in interreligious engagement and in-depth training and scholarship on Advaita Vedanta. Dr. Saraswati is the Acharya of Arsha Vijnana Gurukulam, which was founded in 2004 and has centers in Atlanta, Eugene, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Milwaukee, Fort Myers. She is also the visiting faculty at Graduate Theological Union, Berkeley. As a founding member of the Global Women's Peace Initiative, she has traveled globally addressing the ever-increasing challenges that face humanity in a global ethos. An erudite scholar, Swaminiji addresses contemporary challenges facing the world from global warming to religious social unrest in the unfolding of Upanishads, the foundational spiritual texts of the Hindu tradition. In this talk, Swaminiji will unfold the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, which will unfold the vision of the Bhagavad Gita as a moksha shastra, a treatise for liberation from samsara, a life of constant discontent. I welcome you, Swaminiji, and I request you to take over.
Thank you, Ojasvi. Very nice to be with all of you. It's a great honor to be able to share what I know. That is all, that is how the spirit of this talk is going to be. It's all about sharing what we have received from our Guru, that only we can give. That is all it is about. The Bhagavad Gita is, as you correctly said, a treatise of liberation. We may ask the question, liberation from what? So many things. And the list of things that one wants to be liberated from is unending. It's an unending list. I don't want this.
Swaminiji, I think your video has suddenly frozen.
Asking the person, what are the things that you want to be free from? And the list goes on and on and on. And therefore, the list also includes the people that you do not like, in whose presence you feel upset, annoyed, and the list also includes Bhagavan. If there is something called Bhagavan, the list will also include that. Why did God, Ishvara, Bhagavan, however you call this, cause of the universe, why did they do this to me? And then planets, the planets are all wrong. Saturn is in the wrong place, and then the Venus is in the wrong place, and of course Rahu and Ketu are to blame. The list goes on and on. And then one realizes that one does not have control even on one's own life. What to talk of this list of things that one has to alter in order to be all right. And therefore this helplessness becomes a stepping stone to entering the realm of spirituality. What is spirituality? When nothing works, and that which I am in search of when nothing works. Nothing works means what? Nothing in my hands, that is in my hands, nothing that is in my control works. Not for the lack of trying. One has tried and tried and tried, still it does not work. This is exactly the human problem as illustrated in Arjuna's life. Arjuna finds himself suddenly in the middle of a war with who? His own people. He's a great warrior. He doesn't need any kind of a, what's the word for it? He doesn't have any, he doesn't need any pep talk. He doesn't need any people trying to make him enthusiastic to fight. He is not a pacifist by any means. He's a kshatriya, a warrior, a protector of dharma. That is his calling, that is his vocation, and that is his duty. Being a king, being the commander-in-chief of the army, that's his duty. But yet he finds himself in a war that is extremely distasteful. Why is this war distasteful? What's wrong with this war? He has fought many wars and won them also. But why is this war alone distasteful? If we ask the question, because there is his own people. Drishtvevam svajanam Krishna, seeing my own people. He says in chapter 1 right at the outset, Sidanti mama gatrani mukhancha parishishyati Vepatuscha sharire me vyoma roma harshascha jayate gandivam samsrate hastat tvakcha paridahyate. He is having the first panic attack in history. These are all the symptoms. He says, I feel suddenly feverish. I don't know why. My skin is burning. And then my mouth is dry. That's what happens in a panic attack, sudden dehydration. He says, I'm all confused and disoriented. That's another sign of panic attack. And then he says, my hands are sweaty because my bow called Gandiva is slipping from the hands and it is just falling down. Na shaknomi avasthatum brahmativa me manah. I am not able to stop this mind. It is going all over the place. Brahmati means it's wandering all over the place. And when the mind wanders all over the place, there is no focus, there is no concentration, and if there is no discipline and focus in thinking, all kinds of unwanted thoughts come to the mind. Arjuna was not a superstitious person. He was very scientific, logical man. Suddenly becomes very superstitious. He says, Nivittani cha pashyami, viparitani keshava. Viparitani means I'm seeing bad omens. Nimittani here means omens. I see jackals crying. Array, the jackals were crying every night. But suddenly now only you're noticing. It's like, the neighbor's cat. Every day it rubs against your legs and you say, oh, how cute. And then you pet it, you give it milk, whatnot. And then one day you're going for an important interview. Again, it just runs to you and rubs itself against your leg. Then you say, oh my God, black cat. All this time it was not white. It was black only. But you didn't even notice it. But here you notice it and then you are affected. This exactly happens to Arjuna. He hears jackal crying. He hears some things, the wrong omens. He sees the hawks flying in an anti-clockwise directions. All these things are written. All these things are there. And he says that I can't do this war. This means I cannot fight this war. Why can't you fight this war? You fought so many wars. Because these are my people. And I tell you, if the paper bag had been discovered at that time when the Bhagavad Gita was written, we would not have had Bhagavad Gita. Because when there is a panic attack, it is recommended you breathe into a paper bag. Little bit of carbon dioxide going in the system makes you feel better and the panic goes away. And then Arjuna would have fought the war. No Bhagavad Gita. Thank God the paper bag was not invented because we have this treatise. Paper bag, temporary solution. Bhagavad Gita, permanent solution to this anxiety. That is why we need the Bhagavad Gita. We favor it over the paper bag. In fact, in Kali Yuga, we need both the paper bag and the Bhagavad Gita. We need everything. We need it from all directions, any help that we can get. And so Arjuna gives up this desire to fight, gives up the desire to fight the war because it's his own people. What about his own people? Let us analyze his own people. Duryodhana, what a name, Dushasana. Dushasana means badly behaved. Maybe his name was Sushasana, and then, it was just because of his behavior, it was changed by history itself. So these are all the people. They are all terrorists. Atatayin means terrorist. And the definition of terrorist in Sanskrit is very, very specific. It means you should have done 6 horrible things. You should have set fire. Check. Yes, they had set fire to the Pandavas' lacquer palace, wax house. They lured them in and said, come for a holiday in the forest, and they set the house on fire. So, and then drowning. He had tried to drown the Pandavas, Duryodhana, holding the head under water. Torture this is. Drowning. Desiring somebody else's wife. Check. They had done that. Draupadi was under duress because of these people's bad behavior. Poisoning. Check. And then insulting. Check. Trying to kill. Check. Everything. Arson. Everything. To a T, they were terrorists. Yet Arjuna has a distasteful connection with them, a love-hate relationship, if you will. And then in modern days, what do we call it? A toxic relationship. Toxic relationship, dysfunctional relationship. Therefore, what is that? Arjuna has what is called the mild version of the Stockholm syndrome. Stockholm syndrome means, keeping on making excuses for the people who are terrorizing you. This seems to be Arjuna's condition, and by extension, all the conditions of everybody until they come to the Bhagavad Gita. This is the universal human condition. I do not like what I have to do. Why? Because somebody will be ticked off. Especially in India, we have what will people think it is? This is what it is. What will people think it is? It becomes a syndrome, it becomes a disease, and then Arjuna is, presented at the end of chapter 1 with this kind of a sorrow. Shoka samvigna manasah, the one who is completely immersed in this sorrow. And then what does he do? He just gives up, let the bow slip from the hand, sits down in the chariot. You're not supposed to sit in the chariot. You're a warrior. This is not some cushion and a joy ride. This is not some kind of a Victorian drama where you can just go in a joy ride in a chariot. No. This is a wartime chariot. You're supposed to be standing ready to fight. But he just sits down. I don't want to fight this war. There is apathy which we recognize only too well in the contemporary times. That's why the Bhagavad Gita, the essence of the Bhagavad Gita is absolutely timeless. Absolutely timeless. So there is apathy, there is fear, and there is the distaste to do what is needing to be done. Why? Because I feel alienated from everything, from my work, from what I have to do, from my duty, from other people, from the Jagat itself, from the universe itself. I question my place in the universe. Maybe I was not to be born. Why am I born? Why am I here? What's my purpose? This is how the first chapter ends. Bhagavan gives him a shake-up in the beginning of the second chapter. Kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samuspasthitam anarya jushtam asvargyam akirtikaram arjuna klaibyam masmagamah partha naitattvayupa padyate kshudram hridaya daurbalyam tyaktva uttishta parantapa. This does not become you, Arjuna. This is very unbecoming. These are words I would have expected somebody who is not a warrior like you to say. A warrior is one in the tradition who never gives up. And here we haven't even started the war and you have given up. And then what does Arjuna say? I know I can't leave, but I see one loophole. As a soldier, if I leave, it will be dereliction of duty and everybody will leave with me. So what should I do here? I should just become a sannyasi. From Kurukshetra, where the battle is taking place, to Haridwar, Rishikesh, 1 day's walk. I'll just go there. I'll just order some orange clothes from Amazon and then they will come. I will wear them and I will go sit under a tree. And this will be fine. Nobody will recognize me. And in the tradition, I can become a sannyasi anytime. And then Lord Krishna has news for him. You will become a sannyasi, you will become a terrible sannyasi. Not only will you be terrible at being a sannyasi, why? Because you have all this pressure. You have all the pressure of the years of injustice from the Kaurava clan. You have all this repressed pain and sorrow, unprocessed pain and sorrow. You will just be a big fail as a sannyasi. Not only that, when other people come, let's say they go for a pilgrimage to Haridwar or Rishikesh, see you sitting under the tree, they will say all kinds of words which I cannot even say because I am Bhagavan. All kinds of 4-letter words they will tell you, and they will say you were the destroyer of the Pandava clan. You ran away from the war and you made set a terrible example. Everyone ran away just because you ran away. And then you have changed history. You have changed the course of history. You have no right to do that. Bhagavan's flow you have changed. And therefore, what you need to do is 2 things. One is you have to understand what is it that you find so distasteful. The thing that you find distasteful in war, of course, is death. And Lord Krishna tells him, there is no such thing called death for the eye. There is no death. What death? Which death? No, all of them will be killed and I will be the killer. No, you are not that which is subject to death. Why just death? You are not subject to sorrow. In fact, you are grieving that which need not be grieved over. Because what is the source of grief? Atma, the I, as it is unfolded in the Shastra, in the Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita, can never be a source of grief. Why? Because it is not subject to death. That which is not subject to finitude, that which is not subject to death, is not a source of grief. Oh, so then anatma. Anatma means all the objects other than I. Maybe that is a source of grief. That also is not a source of grief. Why? Because if you look at something, anatma, you know that it will not last. You know that it will not last. Because it is subject to, anything that is put together is subject to falling apart. So if you have a coffee cup, let's say it's your favorite cup, every day you are drinking out of this coffee cup, one day the fingers are made of butter and then what happens? Slips, falls, breaks. You cry over the coffee cup, but then after that what? You console yourself that it was supposed to break anyway. It was supposed to break. That which is put together will fall apart, and therefore the world of objects which are inert and which are other than I, starting with this body mind sense complex, is subject to end, and that also should not be the cause of grief. So there is no grief centered on the I, because the I is free of endings, and then that which is subject to ending, mainly the not I, the world of objects called the not I, in the form of this whole universe, starting with my body mind sense complex, that also is not subject to grief. Why? Because that which is born is subject to die. That which is put together is subject to fall apart. That which comes together is subject to separation. This is the law of the land. This is a universal law. This is the same law if you are in China, it's the same law. If you are in America, it's the same law. If you are in Antarctica, it is the same law. Then why grieve over something that's coming to an end anyway? No, because I don't want I don't want it to come to an end. Why do you not want it to come to an end? Because it's just following a natural course. Because I have the wrong identification thinking that it is me. Something happens to the body, I think something is happening to me. Something happens to the mind, I think something is happening to me. So the problem is with the me not being recognized as what? Satchidananda. That which is, because when I ask you a simple question, are you here? What will be the response? You will not say, let me think and get back to you tomorrow. No. You will not say, let me ask my friend. Hello, friend, am I here? No. Do you exist? What is the answer? Yes, I do exist. I am here. It is the self-revealing I that does not need a proof. About this self-revealing I, there is a confusion. Why is there a confusion? Because it is half known. If it were totally unknown, there would be no confusion. And everybody would say, okay, I don't know myself. I have to go listen to the Upanishad. I have to listen to the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita says, you are non-separate from the creator of this universe. And so everything is, wonderful. Now I know the I. But here, that's not the case. Why? Because I have half knowledge about the I. I know I am, but please don't ask the next question, who are you? Because then all the sad story will come out. Autobiography of a bhogi, not yogi. Autobiography of a sad fellow. Chapter 1, why me? Chapter 2, oh no, not again, deja vu. Chapter 3, it's somebody else's fault, it's not my fault. Chapter 4, guilt. Chapter 5, hurt. Chapter 6, conclusion. No, this never concludes. Chapter 6, to be continued. Next life, next season, every like a next sequel. Like a bad horror movie where they keep making sequels. This is what the Jiva's life is like. Because there is confusion about the I. So it's not that some new knowledge is given. The confusion about the I in the form of wrong conclusion is removed by the Bhagavad Gita, where the I is cognitively shown to not be the sum total of the body, mind, sense complex, but that which is transcending the very body, mind, sense complex with which it is identified. And how is this taught? How does the Bhagavad Gita teach it? By using some wonderful methodologies called prakriya. Prakriya means pedagogical techniques, like the avastha-traya prakriya, the three states of the sleeping, dreaming, waking, the three states of existence, universal experience. So when I sleep, what happens? No problems, no duality, no fears, no tears, nothing. In fact, sleep is ananda. I have ananda in sleep. Waking is the problem. When I wake up and demand my morning coffee, the problems also wake up and have their coffee. This is the problem. And so therefore, sleep and waking, you see, there are two different I's that I confront. In sleep, the I is happy, free of problems, free of fears, free of sorrow. While waking and in dream, the I is subject to incompleteness, sorrow, etc. So then, what do we do here? So what do we do is to see that this I has to be corrected. the notions and the conclusions about this I have to be corrected. And the correcting medium is the Bhagavad Gita, which says you are not subject to sorrow. You are not subject to incompleteness. You are not subject to self-loath. You are not subject to self-judgment. You are not subject to self-critique. You are Ananda, just like how you are in sleep, except in sleep you're not able to recognize that. Only in hindsight you say, I slept well. But the truth is, even when you're awake, this is you. Why? Because this is what you want to be. You do not want to be anything else. Nobody says, I want to be sad. Everybody says, I want to be happy. In fact, it's not even happiness, because if you ask the next question, how long you want to be happy? Will you say 5 minutes? No. 10 days? No. How long you want to be happy? Forever and ever and ever. And that forever happens to be myself that I have to understand. But how is this forever myself? Because this is what we see from cognitively looking at this, the sakshi, the witness of the body mind sense complex. I'm not the body because I can witness the body. Anything that I can witness and objectify, I am not. This is another methodology. Sakshi, sakshya. Sakshya, that which is witnessed, I am not. Anything that I witness, I am not. Can I witness the body? Yes. Can I witness the mind? Yes. Can I witness the senses? Yes. I can witness everything. That means I am the witnessing awareness. I am aware of myself, I am self-aware, and I am aware of everything in the universe. Everything becomes evident to me. I am that sentient self, which is the Sakshi, which is the observer, whose nature is Satchidananda. This much I get in the analysis of the I. But this is not enough for liberation. Because there is always Ishvara which becomes a thorn in the side. Who is this Ishvara? Why is this Ishvara bossing over me? In the form of various laws, in the form of Saturn, in the form of Rahu, Ketu, all these malefic planets. Who is this Ishvara? And then this is the idea. So this Ishvara is, so the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita talk about Tvam Pada Vichara, an analysis into the word I. And then the second 6 chapters, there's a drastic change in the topic. Analysis into the word Tat, which means Ishvara. Jagat Karanam Brahma, the cause of the universe. And the cause of the universe is presented as that same Sakshi, that same Satchidanandam Brahma, that same I, free of sorrow, limitless and whole, but with an unlimited power called Maya Shakti. This is Bhagavan. And this Bhagavan alone is responsible for this whole universe, which is a projection. And this projection, when I believe in this projection, when I look upon the projection as real, then I am subject to sorrow. We cannot say the world is unreal, yet we cannot say it is real. It is not real. Why? Because it does not have the power over me. I am the only sentient thing. It is not real because it is constantly changing. And I am the one witnessing the changes. Therefore, it is not real. We cannot say it is unreal because I see things, I can objectify the things. Therefore, the Jagat has a reality that is in between real and unreal. What is that? Mithya. Mithya doesn't mean false. It means dependent on Satchidananda. What is Satchidananda? I. It is dependent on this awareness, this consciousness, this witnessing consciousness. It is dependent upon this awareness. Independently, it does not exist. Like a shadow. The shadow is cast by me. And so, it does not count as a separate entity. Similarly, the Jagat is just an extension. It's just a mithya. And this is what I have to understand. I have to see this as I am understanding this through pursuing the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita. I can help myself to this knowledge by preparing the mind. To prepare the mind, what do I have to do? I have to get to the place of being relatively cheerful. And who is the one who is being relatively cheerful? The grumpy jiva, the jaded, faded, apathetic jiva, the jiva full of complaints, the discontented jiva. And the discontentment is because of, the Bhagavad Gita herself will tell you, it's because of subjectivity, wrong perception. I don't feel like my desires are being fulfilled. Why? Because I have wrong perception. I feel the world is out to get me. Somebody else's desires are being fulfilled. My desires are not being fulfilled. This is the wrong perception. And because of this wrong perception, I suffer. So the wrong perception has to be removed by the exposure to this knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita and in Vedanta in general. And while I'm doing that, I can change my lifestyle to make it more conducive to the gain and the assimilation of this knowledge. What will that lifestyle look like? The first thing we do is reduce and neutralize the subjectivity. Neutralize the subjectivity. So how to neutralize the subjectivity? The subjectivity comes because the Jagat that I see is not the Jagat that is there. The Jagat that I see is filtered through my glasses of subjectivity, the glasses called raga, dvesha glasses, the glasses that are coming in the way, coloring the universe into certain colors. What are those colors? I like this, I hate this. This is the colors. Raga, dvesha glasses. So certain things I run towards, certain things I run away from. But most of all, I do not understand the Jagat as non-separate from Bhagavan. I do not understand the Jagat as mithya. Even if I am told, so I have to go step by step. First step is to say, I am not in charge of what I am doing. Bhagavan is the doer because I connect to the world through actions. And the actions, if we look at very, very carefully, the actions become the cause of sorrow because of two reasons. First, I'm not happy. I'm never happy with what I do. So there is guilt. And I'm not happy with what other people do. So there is hurt. My own omissions and commissions constitute guilt. Other people's omissions and commissions towards me constitute hurt. So I am guilty. I am subject to hurt. And all because of why? Because of having this sense of ownership to the status of myself as the agent of action. As long as I'm as the agent of action, I'm at the mercy of guilt and hurt. So therefore, the first step in gaining some objectivity is to allow this doership to resolve. And when I allow this doership to resolve, what do? I give it over to Ishvara. I drag in Ishvara as a proxy doer. This is very much there in the culture. In the culture, if you praise somebody, they will say, it's not me, it's Bhagavan's grace, it's Guru's grace. You consciously don't take it on. So there is less disappointment, less ownership to the action, less expectations that certain things should go a certain way. So that's the first thing which is taught in terms of a lifestyle that is conducive to gaining this knowledge. So first we have the vision of Vedanta, a vision of no division, and then a Yoga Shastra, which is the lifestyle of leading a lifestyle that is conducive to assimilating these teachings. So first step is to relinquish the doership and acknowledge Ishvara as the doer. as the mover and shaker and as the doer. And step number 2 is what? Is to see that whatever Ishvara does, then the results of those actions also come from who? Ishvara. So I receive the results of my action with a certain cheerfulness, glad acceptance, if you will, called prasada buddhi. I train myself to say, this is what it is right now. This is how it is right now. It can't be any other way. And so I let go. I let go. And then number 3, I stop doing actions in order to fulfill my likes and dislikes. And instead I start doing actions. I start performing actions only for the sake of inner maturity, self-growth, emotional maturity. That is why I do the actions. My actions are not for the sake of result of action. The actions are for what? For the sake of growth. So therefore, number 4, it doesn't matter what I do. What I have to do, I do. It doesn't matter. Because I don't like, I like, it doesn't come into the picture. Because I'm trying to grow out of likes and dislikes, and I know that I can't always have the privilege of doing what I like to do. That's not life. What is more realistic? I cannot always do as I like. That is what is realistic. Since I cannot always do as I like, I learn to like what I have to do. This is the next point. I cultivate the equanimity to receive the results of action, and I learn to like what I have to do. Next point, what I have to do cannot be outside of what is right, what is correct, and what is correct for me. Dharma, samanya dharma, what is universally right and wrong? Universally, it is wrong to kill, it is wrong to cheat, it is wrong to defraud somebody, it is wrong to steal, and it has always been wrong to do these things. Timelessly wrong, universal. And then there are specific laws in certain countries and all that, and certain according to certain time and place. So I have to be able to interpret this samanya dharma, the universal law of how to act in the world. I have to interpret that at certain times and places. That is very important. And then the final iteration of this dharma is, what is it that I have to do? What is my purpose? And here again there are 2 components. One is a general purpose, which is a no-brainer. If you are a son or a daughter, you have some duties towards the parents. Perform that. If you are a spouse, you have some duties towards the spouse. Perform that. Take care of that. If you are a mother or a father, then you have the duty towards children. If you are an employee or an employer, you have certain duties. You have to do that. And in doing that with the purpose of self-growth rather than self-gratification, one grows out of strong preferences and prejudices and becomes ready for this knowledge. 9/10 of this is preparation. 1/10 alone is the knowledge. So therefore the Bhagavad Gita from verses 7 to 12, after unfolding the nature of Bhagavan as not a guy sitting in the sky, but as the truth of the entire universe, every single thing is Bhagavan, what I like is Bhagavan, what I don't like is Bhagavan, every name, every form is Bhagavan. How do I relate when I understand this? How do I relate to the universe? That is given in chapters 13 to 18. So first is Tvam, second is Tat, Ishvara, and the last 6 chapters unfold the meaning of the word Asi, you are. So how are you this? This is what it is, how to live, how to grow out of strong and recalcitrant, recurrent, forceful, pressure filled desires. This is the teaching. And when I do this, when I overcome these pressure filled desires, then I become ready for this knowledge of non duality. Why? Because I have overcome the battle of the inner Kurukshetra. The battle is a metaphor. Inside is the battlefield. Raga, Dvesha, Dharma, Adharma are pulling, pushing, fighting, confusing the person. Confused, one is confused about the quest in life, one is confused about the purpose in life. That is the second iteration I was saying of Swadharma. First is that what is it I have to do? Second is, why am I born in this particular body? Why do I have these talents? How should I let them express themselves? This is the path to growth. And when I grow in this way, adopting this lifestyle that is conducive to gaining this knowledge, the Guru is not far behind. The Shastra is not far behind. I'm blessed with a teacher. I'm blessed with the teaching. And when I'm blessed with the teacher and the teaching, then naturally the knowledge of myself as Bhagavan, as non-separate from Bhagavan, takes root and blossoms in the heart. And so therefore this dual subject matter of the Bhagavad Gita, together they are, both these topics are very, very important in removing samsara, which is a life of becoming, which is a life of constant complaints, which is a life of discontent. So both of them work together for moksha. What are they? Karma yoga. Karma yoga indirectly helps in gaining of this freedom, liberation from samsara called moksha, by making me ready for this knowledge. Otherwise, it will be just like somebody is talking. I'm not ready for this. I have no preparation, I have no readiness. It won't even interest me. Just outside any ashram gates, there are so many people. What are they doing? Shopping, eating something or the other off the street vendors, talking to each other, gossiping, planning their day. But they're not interested in coming to a seat of learning. That's why the Karma Yoga helps to prepare the heart and the mind to be able to sit with this knowledge, to understand that something is wrong. And the Karma Yoga alone is to be able to listen to the teacher. Listen to the teacher with a free heart and mind, because this is not to be read. Even though you can read the Bhagavad Gita, when you learn it through the teacher, then it stays in the heart, so that you don't come in the way of gaining this knowledge. You means all the notions which need to be removed. I am an idiot, I'm not worthy of studying the Bhagavad Gita. If I think like this and open the pages, how will the teaching speak to me? So therefore, I have to be ready. I have to have receptivity. I have to have, in conclusion, what the Bhagavad Gita talks of as Shraddha, an open heart, reverence, an attitude of reverence towards the Guru, towards the knowledge, towards the Shastra. And then only, if I have this Shraddha, the knowledge is a cakewalk. The Bhagavad Gita says, Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. If Shraddha, meaning the openness, reverence and devotion to this knowledge is cultivated, then all the other preparatory skills are a shoe-in. They are a shoe-in if you have Shraddha. And then with these words we will conclude, and then we will spend some time in questions. Om Tat Sat.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that very insightful understanding of the Mokshastra perspective of Bhagavad Gita. We will delve into the questions now. We had discussed with some of our regular watchers about your profile, and they asked that how does interreligious engagement and dialogue get aided by the Bhagavad Gita in your course of traveling?
Yes, I mean, in fact, without Bhagavad Gita, I could not even imagine this, because out there, is a Kurukshetra, and this whole world of, especially nowadays, because it's like my belief or nothing, it's my way or the highway. We have become very hardened in our belief system. And the Bhagavad Gita allows us to have the perspective to yield, to let go, to listen to the other person. And even if they are being defensive, to see that this defensiveness is coming from a deep insecurity, and to address the insecurity, just like Bhagavan Krishna addressed Arjuna's insecurity. So to look at that insecurity, not only on the individual Vyashti level, but also on the Samashti level. Samashti means total level. Total level, there is terrible insecurity. And what is that insecurity? I am not okay. And so therefore, I have to make sure that my religion I stick to, and then I tell everybody to come to my religion, then only I'll be okay. It's a wrong feeling. We have to live and let other people live. This is how it helps. We are able to listen without prejudice and to see how we can help. See past our individual beliefs, systems, our individual ideologies, and to see how we can together make this world a more peaceful place. Especially if you're a religious leader, that is what one's duty is. You don't just have a duty towards your religion, you have a duty towards the world in your own small way, by not instigating violence, by being ready to listen. And we have to show that and lead by example. And without the Bhagavad Gita, I could not manage that.
Ma'am, another question is that even if I do care about my moksha, I have to permeate through it only through the other three purusharthas. And so then, if we call life or the samsara as a life of continuous discontent, then does discontent become a prerequisite for a driven achiever in the material world, even
Yes,
though in the end they do want to have moksha?
yes. The discontent becomes a driving force for what? For just doing something or the other. They think they are achieving things. If they really were achieving things, then nobody would come to Gita. Nobody would be interested in Zoom. In fact, before the pandemic, nobody even knew what Zoom was. Now, we are more interested, more and more interested. That's why I call it the Karuna virus. This Corona virus was full of Karuna, compassion, because it made everybody into a Vedantin, and all the gurus started to go to people's bedrooms and living rooms via the Zoom. People got interested because why? Because suddenly everything is put a full stop. I have become identified so much with my achievement that when the world goes into lockdown, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know, because my sense of well-being, my sense of worth is in my production, is in my, what is that, output. Here there is no going out. So what can I put? Nothing. I had to learn, one had to learn to live with oneself happily, cheerfully. This is what the pandemic was, a blessing. I mean, it was terrible because so many people lost their lives. Millions of people have lost their lives. That's not what I'm saying. But then something comes out of it. This was like a way to get us to this place where we no longer are the slaves of this discontent and converting the discontent into empty productivity, and instead what we become, we become thoughtful, we become very, very objective. And then nobody is saying, the Bhagavad Gita doesn't say don't go with the purusharthas. It says actually whatever you're looking for is moksha. Really, I can demonstrate to you in 2 minutes. What you're looking for is really moksha. Dharma is for the sake of what? Dharma, I have to be good. Why do you have to be good? So that I'll get lot of punya. Why do you want punya? So that I'll have a nice, happy afterlife. I'll go to heaven and take a selfie with Indra. I'll put an arm around Indra and take a selfie. Because I want to be happy in the afterlife also. So then, do you want dharma or do you want a happy afterlife? Okay, I just want a happy afterlife. So here goes dharma, correct? And then artha. Artha means security. The pursuit of security. You ask the person, do you want security or do you want to freedom from insecurity? It's like the person walking with crutches. Do you want better and better crutches? Golden crutches and made of memory foam and all these things so that it doesn't hurt. Do you want golden crutches, platinum crutches studded with diamonds, or do you want no crutches at all? And what will the person say? I don't want security, I want freedom from insecurity. So then, dharma artha gone. What is this kama? Happiness. Do you want happiness? Yes, I want happiness. Or do you not want to be sad? Then the answer will come, I don't ever want to be sad. You think happiness is an object? No, it is the subject. So dharma, artha, kama swallowed up all that is there. Whatever one is pursuing moksha. Since we are not ready to see that, we have given it the name dharma, artha, kama. Nothing wrong. Pursue dharma. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't say don't pursue dharma. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't say don't be a contributing member in the society. No, please. The Bhagavad Gita does not say give up your job. Please do not give up your job. Okay? Yes. Who will feed us otherwise? Who will feed the sannyasis if everybody were to give up a job? so, so, so this is, it doesn't say give up the job. It says do good to the whole universe. Help. But don't do it for the sake of contentment. Do it for the sake of self-growth. Change the attitude with which you do the actions. Don't stop doing the actions. Because if you stop doing the action and you're not ready for sannyasa, what will happen? We'll have a set of depressed jivas. You'll go into depression. You have to be doing something. Might as well do something that helps you and helps the universe, and then you also grow, and then the universe also benefits. Universe means your own community. It could even be your own family. Whoever you are taking care of. You give, you learn to grow by becoming a giver and a contributor from a scared consumer, a hoarder. This is what the work in the world is. This is the swadharma. Nobody is telling sit at home and don't produce things. Okay, yeah. We are not saying stop acting. We are saying change the way, change the attitude with which you are performing actions.
Ma'am, my concluding question would be that whether we talk about Swami Dayanand Saraswati ji or we talk about any sannyasis, they've had a very pivotal role in social reform. If we take a more recent example, maybe of not the same league, but let's take Yogi Adityanath ji and the work that he did for Uttar Pradesh. Why is it that leaders whose life's framework has been made towards seeking moksha, some of the best leaders that this country has had, what makes them what makes moksha and its pursuit and leadership go hand in hand?
Because there is freedom. I don't want to be a leader in order to have some accolades. I don't want to avoid the brickbats and get the bouquets. I don't want to have a pressure that I want this many followers. And I don't want the feeling that I have to get all these people to listen to me. That pressure is not there. Neither is there some kind of a, what is that, withdrawal and saying, oh, I'm not good enough to do this. That is also not there. One is a fulfilled person. And Swami Dayananda ji was a fulfilled person. And from the standpoint of being a fulfilled person, when a saint embarks on any kind of reform, it is an action completely in tandem with the universal law. There is no private agenda for it. There is no agenda. Even the feeling I'm going to change the world is not there. There is total freedom from any kind of desire and agenda whatsoever. That's why it becomes an organic grassroots movement, like even All India movement of Seva that my teacher started. And then so it becomes a grassroots movement, it becomes an organic movement. And then people naturally, willingly want to join because nobody is being pressured to join. And so when there is inner freedom, then you can work freely. That's how we had Gandhiji, that's how we had Martin Luther King, all these things, so that that inner freedom is what moksha is.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for indulging our questions and our curiosity towards the Bhagavad Gita and providing such a
Thank you.
refreshing perspective. We wish to have
Thank you.
many such talks with you. Namaste.
Namaskar. Thank you very much. Take care. Om Namah Shivaya.